And then I'd like to take this opportunity now to introduce Woody Minar. I'm sorry. It's probably Minar, right? Okay. In any event, now it's time for glasses. All right. Woody started flying in 2000 after retiring from the CIA. Anybody else been in the CIA, FBI? Okay. All right. And then he has more than 8,000 hours in gliders, single engine, multi-engine, and sea aircraft. That's awesome. He is also a designated pilot examiner. Anybody here take a test with him? Nobody's going to throw rocks, tomatoes. Uh-oh. Okay. We won't ask you how that went. All righty. 6-time master CFI, FAA Gold Seal CFI. He's obviously a CFI, double-I, multi-I, and glider. And also advanced instrument ground instructor. Still currently instructing in Osceola, Wisconsin with Adventure Seaplanes and Lino Lakes. Was that an advertisement? I'm sorry. All righty, continue on. In 2009 and 12, he was the Flight Instructor of the Year for the Minneapolis FSDO. And in 2012, the Great Lakes Regional Flight Instructor of the Year. And then in 2013, he was awarded the FAA Safety Rep of the Year. Quite a bit of accomplishments here. And then he's a FAA Safety Team representative, given safety seminars to more than 7,000 pilots through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Florida. Do you travel? I always need a speaker. Okay, good. Is that free? Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Contributing editor also to Midwest Flyer magazine. So, Woody, on behalf of the FAA, we have a certificate of appreciation here for you. So, if you'll take that for me. There you go. Thank you. Let's have a big hand welcome for Woody. And Woody, you're all set.
All right, it should be mic'd up and ready to go. The ad, when I put the presentation together, we're asked in January or February of the year, what presentations can we give at the FAA forum here? And at the time, I had a presentation for 4 accidents that I researched, and they were with friends of mine. Since then, there was a 5th one, so you get a special bonus today on that one. The 5th one involves myself and another pilot. The number one priority cause of accidents is controlled flight into terrain. If you go through the Airman Certification Standards, most of the risk management areas, the answers are controlled flight into terrain. So the first one was in August of 2009, involved a Beech 18 tail wheel. Pilot was 53 years old, a commercial. He had a private and multi-engine, and he just got his single-engine land tail wheel endorsement. He had no experience in the Beech 18, and the flight instructor gave him the checkout. Actually, I think it was a Champ at the time, told him that he needed to get with an instructor in that Beech 18 because it's going to fly just a little bit different than the Champ. And he was going to ferry that, he was recommended that he was going to ferry that Beech 18 from one airport up to our home airport in Osceola. He had a passenger with, she was 29 years old, and a student pilot, a friend of mine. So the crash date was again in 2009. Well, the airplane had been sitting outside at Flying Cloud Airport in southeastern Minneapolis area, and it was used for some parts and so on and so forth. He decided to buy the airplane and refurbish it. So it was about a year before when he did that. So he had the right engine installed, the left engine, and boost pump and ailerons, and basically the airframe was in pretty good condition, all things considered, that it was sitting outside. About a month earlier from the crash, he filled it up, did some run-ups, did some high-speed taxi tests, and he boarded a test flight about 2 weeks earlier because he found gas in the bottom of the plane, and the fuel pressure was low. So he's doing all the right things to get checked out, make sure that after the engines were installed and everything, that everything was working fine. The mechanic then got a special flight permit from the Minneapolis FSDO to fly it from Flying Cloud, Minnesota to Osceola, Wisconsin. The ferry permit said occupants shall be limited to essential crew necessary to operate the aircraft and its equipment, and it expires August 15th, 3 days after the crash. The mechanic was out of town. He wanted to do some more maintenance, check it all out, and he hadn't signed the flight permit. Just wanted to make sure that everything was good before he goes on the pilot goes on this flight. So the day of the crash, 82 degrees, he had a 70-degree crosswind. It was 9 gusting to 15. Now remember, he just had done some high-speed taxi tests and stuff, but hadn't flown the airplane. Now you can imagine flying a twin-engine tailwheel that you're not checked out in, and with a 70-degree crosswind that's gusting to 15. So he just wanted to circle the airport to make sure it flew. In case he had any problems, he could make an emergency landing. He was going to pick up his 3 sons and his girlfriend at Osceola and then return to Flying Cloud. Now, what did the special flight permit say? No passengers. Okay. And it was from Flying Cloud to Osceola. It's very specific if you get one. It's for on this day, for this purpose, and the restrictions. So the eyewitness accounts in the NTSB report said the engines were sputtering, engines sounded normal, loud engines didn't sound good. High angle of attack, what did he do? He stalled it. Black smoke and an engine from the fire, spun it. Wreckage was found upside down. They found dried grass and nesting material found inside the structure. That's because it was sitting outside for a number of years. POH said the fuel selector shall be positioned on the main fuel tanks and the boost pump on. However, the left fuel valve was off, right fuel valve in the rear auxiliary tank, and the fuel boost pump switch was not found in the wreckage. So here's the Swiss cheese with all the holes lining up. No maintenance sign up because the mechanic was out of town and wanted to go over it one other time. He was unfamiliar with the airplane. He had never flown a Beech 18 and he had just gotten his tailwheel endorsement in a Champ. He violated the special flight permit. Carried a student passenger, he was going to pick up passengers, his 3 sons and stuff. Wasn't signed, it was for a one-way trip only. So the question is, was it want to fly it now-itis? Like get home-itis? Don't know the reason. Well, there should be. It's not coming up. There's a picture of the crash. Both of them were killed in that crash. The second one. A Piper Super Cub on amphibs. He was going to go from Osceola, Wisconsin to Minar, Wisconsin, up in northern Wisconsin. He was going to go up there for a conference, leadership conference. He was 54 years old, is 54 years old. He's a friend of mine. In fact, I got my single-engine seaplane rating in that particular airplane. So he's quite accomplished. He got CFI and CFII, quite a number of hours, and over 10 years, about 120 hours of float time a year. This is basically what happens when you land with a gear down in an amphib. It takes about 3 seconds, and this is what happened to him. He landed gear down in the water and flipped over. Luckily, he survived the crash. I don't know why the pictures aren't showing up, but you can see some of the what's flipping through here. You got a retrieval crew. They got a crane. They were pulling it out of the lake. The windshield was smashed in it. So the Swiss cheese on this one is he was focused on the leadership conference. And he did the pre-flight the night before. He wanted to get this thing done, and so they could just go out to his hangar and push the airplane out and go. As he was pushing the airplane out of the hangar, he was on his cell phone. He owns his own business, talking business on the phone, pushing the airplane out of the hangar. And knowing that he had done the pre-flight the night before, he jumped in the airplane just like he would a car. Pre-flight was good the night before. He owns the hangar. There's nobody else in that hangar, so the airplane should be good on this particular day. That was a hot day, so he took his outer shirt off and his life jacket off. He always wore a life jacket. The destination was to a confined area. It was going to be a small lake, so he thought, well, just for practice, on the way up there, I'm going to do a landing on this particular lake. It was a lake about the same size as the lake he was going to, and then take off again, just for practice. He had plenty of time to get to the seminar that he was going to be the main speaker. So he did his downwind base final, did a slip, checked his speed, was okay. Next thing he knows, he was upside down. He said it happened just like that. He says, and he was flying straight floats. He was doing training for another flight school, flying straight floats most of the summer. Here he's in his amphib. He's got a voice activation in the airplane. He calls it George or Eileen. It's got a female voice for when the gear is up and a deep male voice for when the gear is down. He'd put the gear selector down. He left it down when he took off from the airport. And when you get to a certain manifold pressure or flap setting, that voice activation is going to keep going. And it keeps going. Gear down for landing, or gear up for water landing. And it keeps playing, and you can hear it in the head zone. So was it ignored? Yep. He heard it, but he just ignored it. Tuned it out. When talking to him, and I've given this particular portion of the seminar as a separate seminar, and I had him come up here and speak and stuff, but he failed to go through the pre-landing checklist to confirm that the gear was in the correct position. He didn't get into an aviation state of mind because he did the pre-flight before, pushed the airplane out while conducting business, got into the airplane. He's thinking about the presentation, takes the shirt off, the life jacket off because he's hot. So he wasn't really thinking about flying the airplane. Didn't follow the takeoff checklist, which would have said as soon as you take off, you're going to put the gear up. Because it's okay to land an amphib on asphalt or the grass or anything. You're going to stop in a hurry. You won't be able to take off, but at least you're going to survive. And if you land in the water with the gear up, that's the way it's supposed to be. And he didn't follow the landing checklist. This one is a Zenith. I was a test pilot for this. It was built by the pilot who crashed the airplane and two other pilots. And they, I think, worked about 2 years on this. And when they finally got it together, got a permit from the FAA to test fly it at a certain area of airports that I could fly it to, and worked up a checklist, and I made all kinds of recommendations for things that were wrong. In fact, I took off one time and I'm turning crosswind, and as I turned, and the door popped open, and when I turned downwind, because it's a clamshell door, the door just buckled and broke, and there's glass on top of somebody's hangar, but they were down there below. So they made a modification to the door and stuff like that. And so anyway, I was the guy doing the test flying. He was 72 years old, flying as a sport pilot, so he opted not to renew his medical. He had an instrument rating. And in that particular Zenith, he had 72 hours and 404 landings. And I taught him how to fly the airplane. And so he did a flight review and then the training 17 months prior. Okay. I'm not advancing. No, it's not advancing. It's what? Yeah, it's not advancing. It's advancing on my computer, but not on the main screen. Yeah. No, it's not advanced. There we go. It's not going to the. I'm going back, but I can't go forward.
Right. Go ahead, go again, go again. It's stuck on that slide right there. It won't advance past that slide.
Oh, now I've got some here.
Okay.
It's a
Why is it
particular
in that
slide. Yeah. So it was what he was doing. He was going to go to his a family reunion at his son's place. He's got a private airstrip. It's 750 feet long by 150 feet wide. Okay, so that airplane can take off in about 200 feet, 300 feet, and can land in a short period of time. This is what it looks like from the approach end, and then the next picture isn't advancing, but there's a hangar at the other end. So if he came in from the other direction, he would have to come over the top of the hangar, drop it in, and then land and hopefully stop before he got to the bushes. I'll just let this kind of flash through, but you can see where the crash site is there. And what he was afraid of when he landed is to come in and he was going to hit the hangar. In fact, he had a tailwind of about 7 knots when he landed. When he came in, you can see we found some skid marks there. I was out there a couple days after that. So he hit the left brake to try avoiding hitting that hangar. And then what happened is he actually, I wish you could see some of these, but he actually slid into some pine trees sideways. And he had just missed a shed with fuel because his son has a helicopter. So he was lucky that he didn't hit the fuel. So several weeks prior, he practiced short field landings at our airport. We've got a grass runway, it's 2,200 feet, and he just kept practicing these short field landings to make sure that he could land on this 750-foot runway. Again, it was a family day at his son's house, and he had never landed there before. So when he got there, his son, he said, "You're coming in too high, you're coming in too high." And he said, "Well, you don't have to land, go someplace else, we'll pick you up at a nearby airport." He did 3 go-arounds before he landed. Again, he had a long final, he landed long, and again the runway is about 750 feet long, and he landed with just 500 feet left. And again, it was downwind. He said he had gotten a gust of wind underneath the right wing, and then kind of pushed him off to the side as well too, and then he porpoised and bounced. So this is what the plane looked like. There's another one involving a Cherokee 6300, and we're in the Zenith. I probably had 70 or 80 hours in that one. This one I had probably 600 hours in it, and they gave some training to this particular pilot. VFR pilot, 58 years old, and about almost 300 hours. His wife's parents live in Elkader, Iowa, and that's where they were going. And they wanted to take the 6. It's 300 horse, and because his wife didn't like to fly, and plus the fact that it was with a smaller airplane that we had in the club, it was too bouncy for her, and she was getting sick and stuff. So they took this bigger, heavier airplane. The pilot recency, he had gotten checked out on June 5th. Then he flew down to Elkader and back on the 14th of August. He got re-checked out on the 17th of September. And then in October, he flew down to Elkader and back. June and July, he got his 182 high performance endorsement. Got checked out again 5 days before the crash. He got a briefing. It's about a 1.2 hour flight down there. It's a 1,700-foot grass runway. You're trying to land a 3,400-pound gross weight airplane, 300 horse, into a 1,700-foot runway, grass runway. The weather briefing from the forecaster said localized scattered thunderstorms, should be clearing in the afternoon, VFR flight not recommended. What saved their lives was the statements from the house when we went down there the next day. They heard an airplane come in. They hopped in the Suburban. They didn't see it. They went to the end of the runway. They saw the skid marks. They saw some debris, and then they got called the first responders. From the airport manager, the pilot had flown in there a number of times over the past several years. And then we could see that on one of the previous slides. The NTSB said IMC conditions prevailed at the time, localized IFR conditions due to thunderstorm and heavy rain at the time of the crash. Now again, he got the weather briefing, and 1.2 hours, VFR flight not recommended, and 1.2 hours later he took off and flew into a cell of a thunderstorm. Again, a VFR pilot. Two eyewitnesses said it was raining and lightning, rain coming straight down, pouring rain and thundering and lightning, and should never have landed, is what their statements were. And the pilots admitted to me, he said, I got below the clouds, it was about 1,000 feet AGL, he lost his horizontal visibility, and he did a 180, so he got boxed in, did what I was trained to do, turn around and go back. He just happened to see the airport, was on the GPS, happened to see the airport and attempted a landing. Decorah, Iowa is an upper left-hand corner, and then Prairie du Chien and Oldvine, Iowa are the other two airports. And these are what the weather reports were saying. There's 4 miles in heavy rain at Prairie du Chien, which was about 15 miles northeast of the airport, and this was about 20 minutes before he took off. And then he departed. In Prairie du Chien was light rain scattered at 1,900 feet. Oldvine, close temperature and dew point. 45 minutes prior to the crash, now was scattered and clear, so it appeared to be getting better. 25 minutes before the crash, here we go again. 5 miles, mist, broken at 5,500, and then Oldvine, normally things go from west to east. Oldvine is west of the airport, 3/4 mile visibility in heavy rain and broken at 100 feet. So things aren't looking good around that area. And then 5 minutes after the crash, it was heavy rain in Prairie du Chien and light rain was scattered at 100 at Oldvine. I pulled up the historic radar, and the arrow is his flight path. And this was at what it looked like at 9 o'clock, and he was flying to where that circle is at the end of the arrow. Here it is animated. And this is going from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, even a half an hour after the event happened. The airport was in the middle of the cell. Now this was 6 minutes from the storm edge. And that thunderstorm's sitting right in front of him. This is what the airport looks like. It's a downsloping airport. It came in from the approach end here. And there's trees and stuff at the other end of the airport. I've got an overhead slide of this, but he landed with about 400, he landed with 700 feet left, and the skid marks started at 400 feet left. At the end, there was some buckets marking the end of the runway, and you could see the skid marks there, and he just blew through a fence, and it's a huge downsloping area. So this was it's not advancing again. Unfortunately, you can't see it, but this was what the this is what the prop looked like. This is what when the wings looked like. He was going straight ahead, and when he hit the trees turned that airplane 180 degrees around. The NTSB investigator told me, he said he had never seen a crash that bad where somebody wasn't killed in it. What you can't see on one of the next slides is the fact that the door and the right tip tank were about 50 feet from the airplane. So in the process, somehow the door opened up and the trees ripped the door off. Underneath the airplane, you can see that he had full flaps there. And what had happened, you can't see it on here now, is that her seat, she was in the passenger seat, her seat was ripped out, underneath of the airplane was ripped out. And he was hanging onto her so she wouldn't fall out of the airplane. You get a kind of an idea. You can see right in the middle of the picture there that the seat was ripped out, and when it flips up through here, this is looking at the belly of the airplane. That day it was 1,900 feet density altitude. The estimated landing distance for the ground roll was 575 feet and 850 feet over a 50-foot obstacle. That's on a dry, level runway. The NTSB figured that probably 30 to 40% more on wet grass, so it probably required 1,000 feet. Remember, the runway is only 1,700 feet, and he flew into the cell of a thunderstorm. So the distances between the chart and the actual, you can see the difference. Paved and grass level. This was a downsloping runway. It was wet. He had a 40-degree crosswind at 7 knots. The FAA, or the handheld GPS, he had just like a Garmin 396 or something in the airplane. Suggested that he had touched down about halfway down the runway and that he was doing 46 knots at the end of the runway. The stall speed is 50 knots. He said that he doesn't remember hitting the brakes when he got to the end of the runway, but we believe that maybe his wife had hit the brakes. But anyway, there were skid marks there, and once he hit the brush, then it was just game over. Yes.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Do you happen to have a stick?
Yes.
Has this PowerPoint on?
Yes.
Okay. If you'll excuse us a minute, we're going to try to fix the video difficulty. Sorry about that. So we're going to run it on a stick. So.
Yep, it's going to be probably Crash's presentation, and it's going to be the Oshkosh.
All right. Give us just a couple minutes.
I'll go through until it starts flipping. Okay. So what saved these two people's lives is the airport manager's wife and their daughter just happened to be home at the time. There was a couple at the trailer park at the bottom and at the end of the runway, and they just happened to be home at the time. She was doing her hair and stuff, and they heard this crashing and banging of the airplane. Cell service there was extremely poor, and they just happened to have cell service, and he didn't have his phone, but he had his wife's smartphone. He didn't know how to use the smartphone, so he had his wife tell him how to use it, and he was able to call 911. We feel, too, that the other thing that happened is that when the plane went off the end of the runway, the trees destroyed whatever acceleration he had and cushioned some of the blow, but it turned it around 180 degrees rather than just plowing straight through into the trees. Also, in the Cherokee 6300, there's a baggage compartment. It's about yay wide, and when it plowed into the side of the hill, that cushioned the blow as well, too. And of course, their shoulder harnesses obviously helped as well, too. But the Swiss cheese in all this is that he was current in the airplane, but he wasn't proficient. Remember, he got checked out for about a half an hour, and he flew for 2.4. A couple months later, got checked out again and flew for 2.9 or so. Current, but he wasn't proficient. The VFR pilot flew into instrument conditions, flew into a cell of a thunderstorm that he could see up ahead. Another DP, when I was talking to him, told me that he said maybe he relied too much on the GPS, that if he hadn't seen the airport on the GPS, he might have just done the 180 and gotten out of it. Now, granted, he shouldn't have gone into IMC in the first place, but that's hindsight. Forced the landing. It was on a wet, downsloping runway, and one of the eyewitnesses, or the task force that was put together to talk about this, it fit too big of an airplane and too small of a runway. And that's what it looked like. The other one is one I was involved with. This was the old Citabria, the one that crashed. Another pilot and I were in it when we crashed, and we survived. So 1979 Citabria had a 115 horse engine and about 1,200 hours, so about 2/3 of the way through since major overhaul. Not a lot of hours in the mainframe, or in the airframe rather. Maximum gross weight is 1,650. We had done a weight and balance prior to taking off, and we estimated there was 1,612 pounds at the time. Pilot, about 625 hours. He had 1 hour in the last 5 years in the Citabria. And that day he was getting checked out. And he and I have probably 350 hours together. So I know what kind of pilot he is. I'm very familiar with his procedures and stick and so on and so forth. And the communications between us is excellent. At the time I had 7,800 hours, almost 20,000 landings and takeoffs, and I had 375 hours in that Citabria. The airport's at Surfside, Minnesota. It's about 5 miles east of Anoka, which is north of Minneapolis. It's a 1,900-foot runway, 125 feet wide, and the orientation is 0422. And it's actually, there's a seaplane base there too. It's the largest seaplane base in the lower 48. At the time of the accident, 2 o'clock, winds were 320 at 4, so we took off, to the north. Temperature wasn't really hot per se, like in the 90s, but it was 79 degrees, barometric pressure at 30, field elevation and pressure altitude, density altitude was 1,300 feet. Not really high, but it was getting up there. So if we look at the gross, or the calculations of that Citabria, to clear less than a 10-foot obstacle, the NTSB estimated that we needed 546 feet and 1,100 feet to clear a 50-foot obstacle. So we had plenty of runway. So the events leading up to it, the pilot wanted to get current. So at Osceola, our home airport, we have the same orientation of the runway, 0422. It's a grass runway. It's 2,200 feet long, so it's 300 feet longer than the one at Surfside. So we got current over there. He did a good job taking off and landing there. So we're going over to a pig roast. Minnesota Seaplane Pilots Association has a pig roast over there every August, and we stayed for about an hour and a half. You can see the plane parked there, and you can kind of see the runway. And how are you guys doing?
We're going to get you our clicker, and we're going to swap over a machine.
Okay, so I just stop right here?
There you go. Use this clicker.
All right.
It won't. Don't point at your computer because it's not going to receive that.
Okay.
So it's kind of just point toward the screen.
Okay, so here's the runway. We parked alongside the runway, and it looks clear down at the other end. There's planes parked on either side because of the fly-in. So the events leading up to this thing is we started the engine and we waited. We had to wait for 2 airplanes to back taxi and take off. So then we back taxied, and we did our run up, but then we had to wait because there's a seaplane on a cherry picker, if you will, crossing the runway and going down to the water. So we had to wait there for a while. The NTSB asked us, how long do you think you waited? We figured maybe about 10 minutes for this whole thing to take place. So we did a short field takeoff. Went down to the end of the runway, ran it up, everything ran good, and we started taking off. The eyewitness said it seemed to not develop enough power. So our decision-making process is, the pilot in the front seat and I'm in the back seat said, we're not going to make it. And it appeared to want to fly. Now in a tail wheel, if you don't have the proper pitch attitude in a tail wheel, she'll start to bounce, like if she wants to fly. And that's what it appeared to be, is that it wanted to fly. Additionally, it's a grass runway, so you're going to get some bouncing there anyway. It appeared that we had enough runway yet to take off, so our decision making was what to do. Do we slam on the brakes and end up into the brush at the end of the runway? Or do we slam on the brakes and flip So meanwhile, we're going down about probably 50 miles an hour or something like that, and we've got to make a decision here pretty darn quick. So do we intentionally ground loop? Well, if you intentionally ground loop a tailwheel airplane, you step on one of the brakes and the back end becomes the front end really quick. As a side note, people always ask, well, what's it like to fly a tailwheel airplane? I said, well, okay, you've got a tricycle, and you're sitting on the handlebars with your feet up on the seat, okay, and the two wheels are out in front of you. And now you're going to go down this little hill. You're going to be able to control it for a little bit, but eventually those two wheels are going to be in back of you. So you got to stay on top of it. Or do we continue? This is the decision-making process that we had to make in a split second. The normal decision-making process looks like this. And if I can get it to advance. There we go. That was our decision-making process. and trust me, that's what it felt like. So once we made the decision to go, we felt that once we get to the end, we're going to just pull the stick back and pop it off the runway. Something like you would maybe with a crosswind or something, rather than skidding sideways. You can just pop it off the runway, and we briefly became airborne. At that time, either the main or the tail wheel hit some brush. And whatever acceleration we had was destroyed right there. Plus the fact that it drops about 20 feet down at the end of the runway. And even if we had gotten airborne and we didn't have enough airspeed, we would have probably gotten out of ground effect. So the question then that we were asking ourselves, what if we did stay airborne? Would we have been able to sustain flight to the destination, which was about 30 miles away? Would we have gotten to an off-airport location? Or the lake that was immediately ahead of us? We landed in a swamp. Why didn't we abort? And we've asked ourselves that question. You're probably, when I was going through this too, you're asking, why didn't we abort? You know, I'm a DP, I'm a flight instructor. The other guy's a pilot. You got two pilots in the airplane. Probably the two worst people to have in an airplane is two instructors. You know, watch this, hold my beer. But regardless, why didn't we abort? We ask ourselves that question. This is what it looks like at the end of the runway. So where the arrow is, we kind of veered off to the right because we didn't know what these white things were. And when I gave the presentation the first time, I said, I don't know what those white things were. And somebody said, those are beehives. So, you know, in hindsight, it was probably a good thing that we didn't run into it, because now we would have had other problems with the beehives. But we hit that little brush at the end of the runway, and this was taken. We didn't have a way to get home. Our wives were busy, and so we were going to get a ride home. And the guy went down to the end of the runway in his amphib, and the other pilot took a picture. That's where the plane was sitting. And he looked at the runway and said, oh my God, this is too short, so we took off on the water. This is what the crash site looked like. I can make fun of it now because we tell people that, yeah, we did some weed whacking through the marsh there. And then when the wheels hit the ground, I thought we had stopped. And it felt like it was slow motion when we actually just flipped over. To the right of us, about 50 feet, maybe 75 feet, is trees. Beyond this, which you can't see, probably 50 to 100 feet, is a lake with some water. So we were lucky in that aspect. So this is kind of what it felt like. So just imagine yourself climbing, but not... So the tail is up. This just happened to be a downsloping runway, but the other one's flat. But the decision to go, and this is where we lost it, and down we went. So if we had made it, it might have been that. But this is what happened. This was taken about 10 minutes after we're out of the airplane. And I'll tell you, if you don't have shoulder harnesses in your airplane, get them. Because that stopped the blow. I'm on blood thinners, and I had a nice black and blue and green and yellow mark from the shoulder harness here and across my stomach. But my head would have probably hit the front seat in there. So now Jeff and I are hanging upside down in the airplane. Okay, now what do we do? Okay, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. So I said, okay, I'll get out first. And we're kind of disoriented because we're going to climb out the window. For whatever reason, we're going to climb out the window instead of checking the door. Wait a second, we got a door here. Let's try to open that. So we opened the door, and I released the seat belt, and I have no recollection from the time I released my seat belt to the time I got up standing on the wing, and Jeff is standing next to me. And I think it's because I hit my head on the bar that's above me here, and I looked like Gorbachev for a while. I had a nice mark on my head. Jeff fell to the floor when he released his seat belt. And then this was taken after the FAA and police and everybody was out there. So you can see we're doing some pretty nifty weed whacking. So the question then on this particular case, was the air intake blocked? About 45 hours before that, the cowling had been removed, and when you put the cowling back on, you got to fit it into the air intake, and sometimes that cowling or the rubber connecting material can get folded over and block the air, and that wasn't the case. The NTSB ruled it out. Was the mixture out too far out? No, because that was in. We confirmed that after the crash. Was the primer out, not locked? Nope, because we confirmed that after the crash. Was the car beat on? No, because it was confirmed after the crash, and when I'm sitting in the back seat, I always put my hand on the throttle and the car beat to make sure both of them are in the forward position. Were the plugs fouled? No. It was confirmed after the crash, so the plugs were okay. Feet on the brakes? No. I'm sensitive to that. Anybody who's flown with me knows that I said, quit riding the brakes. And I even asked the pilot, are you riding the brakes? He said, no. And this is on our takeoff. Was the fuel contaminated? No. They checked the fuel and it was okay. Was it a bad mag? Our mechanic went up there and checked the airplane out, did a run-up. There's no vibration whatsoever. And the mags checked out. The compression was a little low on the number one cylinder. And the question was, one of the mags turned off? No, because one of the things I check when I'm in the back seat is all the switches are up, all the lights in both of the mags and master and everything. So that was ruled out. So what's left? We think, and the NTSB thinks, that it was carb ice. Now, I did some research following this that carburetor icing during takeoff is not as rare as some would think. And if you Google it and Google carb ice, that yes, it can happen. And I've had carb ice on takeoff before. One time I'm taking off from Madison, Wisconsin. It's at night and it's raining and we're climbing out and the engine starts running really rough. Now that doesn't get your excitement going. So we pulled the carb out and then it smoothed it right up. The other thing too is it can happen on the ground, even while we're waiting. So the exact problem, we don't know what that is, but we figured that the carb ice with a low compression cylinder on 115 horse, reduced horsepower. Could it have been prevented? Yes. If we had boarded that takeoff, it could have been prevented. So carburetors, check before you take off. And I've talked to a number of people at other seminars and personally and stuff, and some of them actually keep the carb heat out while they're taxiing and keep it out just before they take off, just as a preventive measure to prevent carburetor ice, because it can build up if you have to sit and wait and so on and so forth. Auto gas obviously is more susceptible, so if you got light sport or something like that, then you could probably get carb ice. So the Swiss cheese in this then starts with the familiarity with the runway conditions. Airport familiarity and the outside factors. Outside factor being the pig roast. Wanted to get to the pig roast. I mean, we had all day to get there. He had never been to this airport before. I'd been in it numerous times in 3 different aircraft with and without people. So I was familiar with that airport. He wasn't. So therefore, proficiency versus currency. And also compliancy. Currency and compliancy are basically the same thing. Kind of similar to the Zenith pilot, where he was current, but he had never flown into that airport before. So could it happen in a 172? Probably not, because he was used to flying a 172. So when the pilot and I were talking, he said he felt that he was stretched beyond his comfort zone. Because you fly in there, and it's a big pucker factor, because sometimes you got to come in over trees, and there's trees, you know, on either side. So instructor complacency, I put some of the blame on myself, because I got complacent because I had been in there. He hadn't been in there. We have 350 hours together in different airplanes. We've been around the country together. So I got a little complacent with him. So the main thing is, don't get complacent about anything. Just because I've been in there before, or you've been in there before, or have done this, doesn't mean you can do it again. Same with the weight and balance. The NTSB looked at our weight and balance, and we had figured out, and they figured out about the same as we did. They measured the amount of fuel in the plane and the stuff that we had in the plane and our weight and stuff, and they came out about the same weight and balance that we did. But also considering the density altitude. We're in the dead of summer, 80 degrees, 90 degrees, it can make a huge difference. And also too when you get up in the higher elevations. Checking the carb beat before takeoff, or leaving the carb beat on during the run-up, or if you're taxiing and stuff like that, will help prevent ice buildup before you take off. So this is what it looked like beforehand. I don't know if I've got the picture of that in there, Ed. So just got a causal factors review here for using the PAVE method. For the pilot, Beech 18, he was inexperienced. He had never flown a Beech 18 before. Just got his tailwheel endorsement. The seaplane was preoccupied with that leadership conference that he was going to. The Zenith pilot was unfamiliar with that airport. The PA-32 pilot in that Cherokee 6 was tested because he flew in the cell of thunderstorm, and the Citabria pilot was current but not proficient. So then we go to the aircraft. Well, it was an unairworthy Beech 18. The seaplane and the Zenith and all the other airplanes were okay. So the environment, the Beech 18, he had a crosswind. Seaplane was okay. It was a nice day. The Zenith went to the new airport, IFR, and then the unfamiliar environment for the Citabria. The external pressures, the family. Going to pick up his 2 sons and one of their girlfriends. Seaplane pilot was going to a seminar, so he's preoccupied with that. He had to get there. Family day for the Zenith pilot, and get-there-itis for the PA-32 pilot, and then the Citabria pilot was tested. So where all the Swiss cheese is in there. So we've got all the threats that are in there. And if there's an error made, then you have an unintended consequence or undesirable aircraft situation, and then the accident or the incident happening. So what goes through your mind in all these cases, we have to be a man-machine interface, taking a look at our mental state and our emotional state. How do we feel about today? Are we in the right frame of mind? Are we in an airplane? Do we have an airplane attitude? Pushing the airplane out of the hangar, being on the cell phone, getting in that airplane frame of mind. The physical state, are we healthy? Environmental conditions, VFR flight not recommended. Seeing a cell of a thunderstorm ahead, clouds and stuff, maybe I shouldn't continue. Then what are our capabilities? being tested at an unfamiliar airport? And what are our limitations? Taking all these into consideration. So the bottom line is you don't want to have get-there-itis or want-to-fly-it-itis. Using good aeronautical decision making and using a good pre-flight. Knowing before you go. Discussing if you have another pilot, are you happy with this decision that we're making? Are we going? Knowing NOTAMs, lengths of the runways, conditions of the runways, and not getting complacent. And always just keeping your head in the game, never forgetting about flying. How many times have you driven down the road where you may have gone 30 miles down a freeway and you wonder, geez, I don't remember seeing anything. You're just thinking about something else or listening to music or whatever. Everything's going along smoothly. It's no different than being in an airplane, but the consequences can be much greater in an airplane. And again, proficiency always trumps currency. If you're a wings participant, there's a real good course. It's ALC 63. So if you go to the FAAsafety.gov and you search for courses, if you search for AL 63, it's on performance and limitations. And it's a really good course to take. We've got a few minutes. I just want to run back a couple of the slides that you didn't see. So this was the direction of flight. This is what it looked like, the first responders for that Cherokee 6 accident. This is her seat. It had ripped out the bottom of the aircraft. Again, the wing, you could see that it was going in a different direction. The grass in between the flap and the aileron, or I'm sorry, the leaves. This is her seat, and it ripped off part of even the wing. And of course, the door is missing. This is what it looked like, when it crashed into the hillside. And again, you can see the leading edge of the wing gone there. And you can see that kind of pancaked down in front of that tree. So they must have been sitting up and then they came back down. The door, again, the door in the right tip tank is about 50 feet from the airplane. You can see the door is all twisted. Pardon me? She had a broken ankle and a skin graft on her leg, and he had some bumps and bruises, but he was okay. And I'll just show you one last animation, and then I'll take any questions.
So anyway, I've been to a lot of places. I've helped a lot of people, save a lot of money. But today, things have been a little strange. Meep, meep. Oh, a strange place.
So I got a weird sense of humor anyway, but I thought here's two pilots and similar situations but different outcomes. One's in a hurry to try to get something done, and the consequences were bad. So anyway, I just want to say fly like your life depends on it, because it does. Is there any questions about any of those 5 crashes or anything? Yes, sir. Yeah, okay.
Repeat the question.
The question is there anything about max power, checking max power checks before takeoff? Yeah, a lot of people, they asked us, what was our airspeed when we were rolling down the runway? At that time, we didn't look. We didn't see what the airspeed is. A lot of people will say, okay, check the airspeed. Airspeed's alive, but is it coming up to speed? The other one is it developing enough RPMs? Taking a look at the tach. Is it developing enough RPMs? The other one, too, is having an abort point on takeoff. If we had selected a point on that runway, we could have said, okay, when we reach that point, we'll abort the takeoff. Any other questions? Yes, we do a lot of things differently now.
Why do you do it?
Why? When? When we, like on a short field takeoff, we'll make sure everything's up and running, and then when we're rolling down the runway, we should see the tach come up, 2,500 RPM or whatever. Yes?
Woody, for takeoff, and what do you now say about that as an instructor? I know I was instructed not to use it, so I'm hearing something different here, and
Well,
maybe others are too.
The question about using carb ice on takeoff, I think the 182 sometimes says, like in the wintertime, maybe using some carb ice to keep the engine warmer, carb heat rather. What I'm reading and what I'm learned is to, if nothing else, when you're taxiing and stuff, keep the carb heat on, especially in conditions like this, where carb heat or carb ice is susceptible, and then before you take off, or as you're getting onto the runway, then turn your carb heat off. Because you want to develop the maximum amount of horsepower. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No,
By using carb heat on takeoff?
no, on during taxiing.
No.
Okay.
Not that I know of. Yeah. Well, they're saying following plugs, but you can lean it out on taxi too. We got a question here.
There's not a question, but comment. Generally, one
Hang on.
question I hear. Let me get Thank you. Yeah, one thing that I have heard, carb heat's usually a no-no because you'll pick up some debris and everything else because it's actually an alternate air source as such. So it's usually not a good idea depending upon the conditions you're taxiing.
Sure.
The other thing is, I'll just comment, I don't know if it makes any difference or not. My own personal preference, I've been dinged by some check pilots on it, is usually when I'm sitting waiting for a while, I usually run the RPM up a little higher, like about 1100 RPM or something. They say, you don't have to do that, we're sitting here waiting. You run it down to 800 or so, but my foot's on the brake, and I find that generally if you're keeping the RPM up a little bit, when you get in a takeoff position, sometimes you're in a hurry, they ask you to expedite the takeoff. It seems to run up a little bit smoother rather than starting out from
Sure.
800 or else, and you get the type of thing like that.
Yeah, that's a good
May
idea.
or may not have made a difference. I don't know.
Yeah, every airplane is different. Every condition is different. Like you said, using carb heat on a grass runway, yeah, you can pick up a bunch of stuff. If you're on an asphalt runway, most likely you're not going to pick up something. So, just have to use good judgment.
What was the temperature?
I'm sorry.
What was
79 degrees, and the dew point I think was 57, something like that.
What was the course number again, please?
The course numbers is AL63.
Thank you.
And that was recommended by the FAA after the accident as part of the compliancy. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.